The second was from 583 Hijri to 585 Hijri, lasting around 2 years and a few months. After that, the third trip took place in 610 Hijri, or sometime before that. Many travelers copied from his work, like Ibn al-Khatib, al-Fasi, al-Muqari, al-Tilmisani, al-Balawi, and Ibn Battuta. The most famous traveler, Ibn Battuta, copied a lot from Ibn Jubayr in his journey. He was a clerk in the Caliphate Council in Andalusia. The story of his trip was a funny one. He was in the Caliph Council one day, or in the council of the governor of Granada, who used to drink wine. The governor offered him a glass of wine, but he rejected it. The governor insisted, so he drank it. A while after, the caliph offered him 7 glasses of gold as compensation. However, he decided to make the pilgrimage to the inviolable house of Allah to atone for his sins. He decided to travel from his country, Andalusia, by sea and sailed along the northern shore of Africa to Egypt. After that, he traveled to Alexandria, then made his way to Jeddah by sea. From there, he traveled on land to Mecca al-Mukarramah and then al-Madinah al-Munawwarah. The importance of Ibn Jubayr's journey doesn't lie in his accurate description of Mecca and al-Madinah, nor in the fact that many travelers who came after him copied parts of his books, but because he described his trip until he reached al-HAJJ, allowing researchers to know much about the political, social, and even economic sides of life that was prevalent in the 6th Hijri century and after, especially in Egypt. The city was an important and quintessential stop for pilgrims and travelers from Morocco. Many of them came by sea, so Alexandria was the main city to host them. Ibn Jubayr didn't forget to discuss this in detail. He mentioned that many Moroccans came to Alexandria to benefit from the conditions in Egypt, which was ruled by the Ayyubid dynasty in that period. As Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi used a very clever yet dangerous strategy aimed at forming a huge population mass in Egypt to face the dangers that threatened the Islamic world at the time. The city flourished in that period, as there were many schools, mosques, and educational facilities. The number of mosques were estimated to be between 8,000 and 12,000 mosques. He traveled to Cairo next, passing in the towns that formed the delta. He pointed out the prosperity in Egypt back then, thanks to Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi. He stopped in Cairo, the largest capital of Egypt, one of the most important Islamic capitals in that time, as well as the center of Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi's government. He said that the city was a workshop back then. Walls, fortifications, and a castle were being built, as well as many military measures to prepare for war with the Crusaders. Ibn Jubayr describes in much detail the port of Aydab, the main harbor from which all naval trips headed towards the Holy Land sets out from, sailing to Jeddah on the eastern shore of the Red Sea. He also describes that it was the pilgrimage season back then. People were traveling by boats that carried them to Jeddah. According to Ibn Jubayr's descriptions, these boats were especially built as they didn't contain any nails in them. Instead, Their parts were assembled together using special threads extracted from coconut fruits. The sailors there used to take advantage of this season to load their boats with as many passengers as possible, to a degree that is not considered humane. They wanted to gain as much money from the people as they could in this very important season. It is strange that many of these boats were lost in the Red Sea, as it was a hard sea to navigate through during this time period. This is owed to the presence of coral reefs, so captains of these boats should know how to sail their ways through such seas. It seems that Ibn Jubayr's stay in Aydab port for a month, and the inability of his ship to sail to Jeddah, wasn't due to the absence of sailing winds. The movement of the wind affected the ships, as the windy season hadn't started yet. We think that the wind wasn't the reason of the delay, but it was the fact that the Crusaders managed to deploy some ships in the Red Sea. They attacked many ships there. Some ships were trading ships, while others carried pilgrims, who were captured and horribly killed. Eventually, this campaign decided to land on the eastern shore of the Red Sea, aiming to conquer Al-Madinah al-Munawwara. This action made Salah ad-Din send a land campaign, which succeeded in imprisoning the attacking forces. Although Muslims were able to prevent these events, and managed to imprison those who wanted to defile the holy mosque of the Prophet and attack Al-Madinah al-Munawwara. If we compare the situation that Ibn Jubayr had described to us in that period and the transportation system and ship movements in the Islamic world, we can say that the case was the contrary, because Muslims used advanced methods in the process of manufacturing ships. There was great advancement in transportation and in the importing of larger goods, which was definitely brought on board huge ships. But what happened in the time was facing these odds, and the reaction to the invasion of the Red Sea by the Crusaders, before it was secured again by the leader Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi and his naval fleet commander Najm ad-Din Ayyub. Ibn Jubayr returned to describing the gates of Mecca, which is Jeddah, after al-Maqdisi and Nasr Khosraw wrote a little about it. The first signs that we observe in Ibn Jubayr's description of Jeddah's port is that he pointed out the city was like a town. He also said that there were great but ancient buildings surrounding it that indicated to its great architecture. This point takes us back once more to Nasr Khosraw and the circumstances that HAJJ went through in that period, and the deterioration of the structural condition that affected this region in general. Nevertheless, the signs of prosperity started to return to the city, as he mentioned hotels and houses built with stones, though many others were built using cane. This meant that there were temporary migrants that came to the city. It also meant that most of its inhabitants were Alawites, or followers of Al-Hassan or Al-Hussein, and they were very poor and in dire need of assistance. They worked doing anything they could to serve the pilgrims in order to make a living and get by. At the same time, he speaks about the system that supplied Jeddah with water. It consisted of reservoirs and stored water in wells, as he called them. They were similar to tanks carved in stone, where rainwater accumulated to supply Jeddah with water, as the city had always suffered from water shortages and droughts. As soon as he arrived to Mecca, Ibn Jubayr started describing its mountains and its inhabitants' lifestyles as his predecessors did. He focused on what people of Mecca called the Holy Rajabi visit of Al-Madinah Al-Munawwara, as well as other religious celebrations. He also wrote about the prevalent political conditions in Mecca al-Mukarramah. It was known that the nobles of Mecca had the power in HAJJ. Ibn Jubayr was skeptic about many of the rulers of Mecca because they didn't make the necessary reformations in the holy city, and the fact that they took a share of all of the incomes of the two holy mosques. He stated, "The biggest share of every project in Mecca is taken by its rulers." So he deeply criticized these rulers, and especially the members who imposed taxes on the people of Jeddah.